Grandma has this dress.
Nah, neither.
I feel like Harry Potter. Too librarian. Too Bono?
No.
No. No. Big no.
Yes.
I look a little bit like a bumblebee. How long you been in these parts?
Blah. If sadness had a color. I bought this? Your Honor, I object.
No. This is so much like my dad.
That is the ticket.
Support for KQED Live comes from Berkeley Rep and the San Francisco Symphony.
Disproportionate impact of
More than half of black business owners.
And disproportionate.
Somehow we always find a way to rise.
To the blueprint builders, to the backbones of every block, for the curators of the culture, and for generations to follow. You might fall, but never fail. Keep rising, keep rising, keep rising. Apply for a business, marketing, and tech makeovers on us.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to KQED Live. How's everybody doing tonight? All right. Thank you for coming out tonight. We have an amazing show, a really vast undertaking that I'm very excited about. It's been a lot of work, and I'm so happy that you're here to share in the work that we've done. Before we get started, I would like to thank our season sponsors. We have 4 amazing season sponsors who make everything that we do possible. They are Asian Art Museum, Berkeley Rep, Comcast Business, and the SF Symphony. Let's hear a round of applause for our sponsors. And of course, because this is a Bay Curious event, there's another sponsor, a sponsor of Bay Curious, Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, who not only sponsors the show, but has generously donated beverages for tonight. I hope that if you are of age, you are partaking in those beverages. We have non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverages for you, so please check those things out. Before we get started, I want to tell you about what we do here. We are KQED Live. We are the events arm of KQED Public Media. My name is Lance Gardner. I am a producer with KQED Live. We produce shows here at 2601 Mariposa in the Commons, and many of our shows can be found online at youtube.com/KQED Live. If you would like to see what we have upcoming, you can go to kqed.org/live. How many of you were here for KQED Fest? Yeah, that was a big undertaking. We're very proud of that. Thank you for joining us. And now, for another enormous undertaking, I'm happy to present the Bay Curious book launch. And before the show, there was a mobile quiz sponsored by Comcast Business with some questions related to Bay Curious. Perhaps you took this quiz by scanning the QR code, and perhaps you are the winner of this quiz. If your name is, drum roll please, Wilco Schutzendorf. All right, right in the front row. Wilco, you are the winner of the Bay Curious book, the very first copy to be delivered. You already have one. All right. Well, get it signed and sell it on eBay. So I would like you to know that we will have copies for sale in the lobby after the show, courtesy of Green Apple Books. If you did not pre-order one, then you are welcome to buy a copy. We will have contributors signing the books in the lobby as well. So please, after the show, stick around, hang out, get your books signed, buy books, make it worth your time. Now, speaking of your time, I've already wasted a lot of it by making you wait. We're getting a late start. Thank you for being patient. I would like to introduce the host and editor of the Bay Curious podcast, the host of tonight's show, and now officially the author of the Bay Curious book, Olivia Allen-Price.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thanks. Hello! Welcome! Thank you all so much for coming. I am elated to be here. I have been dreaming of this day for the 3 some years it took to make this book a reality. So thank you so much for coming. So tonight we are celebrating the publication of the book, Bay Curious, The Hidden True Stories of the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's a book that 25 journalists helped create. You're going to get to know some of them a little bit more tonight. The book has 49 stories, and some people ask, why 49 stories? Why not 50? It's a nice round number. Well, that's based off the idea of the 49-mile scenic drive, which, if you're not familiar, is a 49-mile driving route that meanders around San Francisco and hits a lot of the highlights. With this book, we were trying to do something similar, hitting the highlights of not just San Francisco, but our entire region. At its core, this book is a celebration of Bay Area culture, home of possibly the nation's first gay bar, birthplace of the word hella among Black youth in Oakland. It highlights some of the people who have left an impact here, people like Frida Kahlo, Charlie Parkhurst, and Mary Ellen Pleasant, who, if you've listened to the show for a long time, you might know a little bit about already. It roots us in the history of the land, from the prehistoric creatures of the last ice age to the 40 tribes of native people who lived here before colonization. It takes us on a tour of beloved attractions like Sutro Tower and the Winchester Mystery House. And the book even makes us a little hungry with stories about sourdough bread, Rocky Road ice cream, and what I will be drinking at the end of tonight's show, a Mai Tai. Tonight we'll be featuring 10 of those 49 stories here on stage. Conveniently, none of these stories are stories that I wrote, so I get to just kind of relax a little bit. But you'll be hearing from a lot of the other reporters this evening. In most cases, you're going to hear the reporter behind the piece reading an excerpt from the book, and then there's a twist, and something cool happens. You guys ready to get started? Yeah. All right. She is a podcast producer at the LA Times. Please welcome Asal Ahsanpour.
Hello, everybody. In the 18th century, the area from the lower Napa Valley to South Monterey County was one of the most densely populated Native American territories in all of North America. About 40,000 people belonged to some 40 tribes, settled in permanent villages beside creeks, in lush grasslands and forests, and near the ocean. Euro-American colonizers lumped these distinct tribes into one group and called them Costanoan. Now, they're commonly called the Ohlone. Though each Ohlone tribe held its own territory, they had similarities in their culture, religion, language, and diet. Families lived in round homes built from a variety of materials, most often tule reeds or tree bark. Elite families had larger homes, measuring as much as 20 feet across. Some villages also had a ceremonial structure called a tupentak, big enough to hold hundreds of people. These came in handy during multi-tribe gatherings to trade goods, make economic and military alliances, or hold religious ceremonies. They ate a diversity of plants, fish, birds, and animals. They hunted deer, antelope, and elk, and they fished for sturgeon in the bay and steelhead or salmon runs in the river. We know all of this because elders have made a point to pass down the stories of Ohlone traditions to their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. And some of these children were listening very closely. Here to drop some knowledge on us are Ohlone cultural leaders, chefs, and creators of Cafe Ohlone, Vincent Medina and Louis Trevino.
Hi. Welcome, Louis and Vincent. So you all have been, like as Saul said, cultural leaders, and have shown the world that Ohlone culture is not something that's in the past, but very much in the present. What role did oral history play in your understanding of your culture?
I'd like to start by saying Horshetuhi hemmenya. Hello to you all in Chochenyo language. So what a beautiful question. And oral history to us, I think a lot about my great-grandmother Mary. My great-grandmother Mary Archuleta, she was born in 1910 on the old Sonol Rancheria, into a world surrounded by traditional culture, with our beautiful baskets, with our traditional foods, speaking the language, carrying on the old ways. When I was a child, I got to spend much time with her. And I'm so grateful to be able to know that our elders have consistently kept the old ways going strong. Listening to them, we always want to make them proud, make sure we follow in their footsteps, keep the culture moving forward.
And you two are chefs, and we're going to get to the food in just a moment, but I understand that you met working on a different project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so both Louis and myself were active in the strengthening of our Ohlone languages. Our family's language is Chochenyo, from just east of here in the East Bay, on the other side of the bay, where we continue to live at today, our community. My partner Louis, he also speaks Rumsen, which is the language of Carmel Valley, Monterey area. We met studying language through the old archives at UC Berkeley. Fell in love, and the rest is history.
And tell us about your restaurant and what inspired you to open it.
Well, Louis and myself, we opened up Cafe Ohlone back in September of 2018 as an extension of our community work with Makamham, a cultural institution that works to create programming with our elders' leadership to see Ohlone foods continue to be on the plates. Now, we opened up Cafe Ohlone because we've never left the East Bay, but a lot of times people didn't know that we were still around because a lot of ignorance that existed, outdated stereotypes. We opened up Cafe Ohlone as a place to celebrate our traditional foods and provide representation for our community. Secondary goal there is to teach the public about who we are using our own voices so that folks understand who we are, understand how living our culture is, that we're in our home today exactly where we've always been in an unbroken way that stretches back into the ancients.
So I do want to talk about food. You are known for your acorn brownies. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that recipe came into fruition and what you have to show us here today?
Well, I want to acknowledge my partner. He's the brownie chef, so I can't take credit for that right there. But acorn flour, it's such a decadent food. Now, often if you grew up in California, it might have been written about in a way that doesn't match reality, which sometimes is written about as being more of a subsistence food. Acorn is a luxury food. It's about a 6-month-long process to make from beginning to end, from gathering the acorns in our homeland, curing them, being able to let them dry all the moisture, and then from there, using these fine baskets to be able to take the next steps to processing them into flour, and then into soup, and then into bread. Now, when we were introducing some of these traditional foods to our younger people, all of our elders, they remember eating acorn. Because of a lot of development on our homeland, it's harder to come by these days. So we wanted to introduce the acorn flour to them, and we thought a brownie would be the perfect way. Louis found this amazing brownie, developed this amazing brownie recipe. And from there, we incorporated things that were more beneficial for our community, like gluten-free flour, coconut sugar instead of white sugar that's lower glycemic, being able to bring in traditional nuts like the black walnuts, the acorn flour as the main grain right there, and then salt that we harvest from the bay shoreline with our community. Now we thought if we can be able to have this be a way to introduce that to our community, to our young people, then that's a win. We thought though, little by little, we would get rid of the chocolate and just get back to the pure grain. But our elders, they said, Louis, don't get rid of those brownies. And so it's a reminder that you can have one and you don't have to erase the other. That you can be able to have something contemporary and still have something traditional, and those can coexist in the same way. It's part of living culture right there.
I love that, yeah. So tell us a little bit about what we're looking at.
Well, these are old family baskets. They're all about 120 years old. They're all made with these fine California plants like sedge and willow. There's hazel. There's also in some of these bracken fern that's used as well. Redbud too. California native plants that have long been stewarded by our people through fire management for thousands and thousands of years. These baskets, we still use them though regularly in order to make the acorn soup and the acorn flour, acorn soup, acorn bread, then for brownies. Now, right here, these two baskets that are on both sides, these are winnowing baskets. In order to take off all the skin, because our elders have such high standards with acorn flour, so we got to take off all the skins and winnow off all the skins, and we use these old family baskets right here to be able to do so. So Lewis is going to demonstrate what that looks like when the acorn skins fall off after they're all cured. You see those red skins come off. The elders make sure that there's no red at all, and none of the red skins at all on any of the acorns. Otherwise, they'll tell us to do it again. They have to be perfect, right? And so they have very high standards. We always want to make sure that that's followed. After the acorns are all winnowed, after all the skins are taken off, then we grind it in a mortar. Some people go, not in our community, not in our family, but some people we heard go the easy route with a Cuisinart or something. Doesn't work, because when you do it in a stone mortar and pestle, all the oils come out. It gives it a better taste, you doing it the old way. And so after we have the acorn flour ground, which we have some right here, the acorn that's been partially ground and some of it that's still whole, then Lewis is going to demonstrate how we sift it so that the flour is as fine as can be. This process is very important because the sifting makes it so that the acorn continues to be as very fine flour that helps it so that when it leaches, everything is nice and sweet instead of bitter and sour. So right there, Lewis just rubbed in the acorn flour with a soap-root brush. And then from there, what we're going to be doing is using a knocker that's made from a burl of an oak tree right there. We're going to knock the acorn flour out and show you what's the acorn that we use for the next step, which is the leaching process. So if you see that coming out right there, that's the pure acorn flour right there. So it will also make it so that if there's any chunks, they won't fit into the grooves of the baskets. Because if there's any chunks, the elders will again say, do it again. It's got to be perfectly smooth. So this is a way to ensure that acorn is uniform, it's smooth, and it leaches properly. Then after that, then it's boiled in watertight cooking baskets with cooking stones that get treated to about 5,000 degrees. And within 5 minutes, you have boiling hot acorn soup.
Wow.
Yeah.
Quite the labor of love.
Yeah, and we want folks to know as well, it's not just a food of the past, but it's a food that we eat regularly. We had acorn soup for breakfast today. And so this is very much a living part of our culture.
And I understand when you do enjoy food, you like to do that communally. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so being able to show Ohlone hospitality and generosity is something that we're able to do at Cafe Ohlone, to teach people about the abundance that's in our homeland. And also, when we feed folks, that's a way of also being able to share something from our culture. Now, in our language, we all have a word which is ammamak, which is let's eat. And so we have a brownie for everybody in your bags that are there. But we'd like to be able to practice a little Chochenyo. So if you can all say this with me, ammamak.
Ammamak.
There we go, speaking Chochenyo already. That means let's eat. So with that, I think we can be able to have our brownie right there.
All right, take a bite.
One thing, though, if I could just add before our time is done here, is please to always keep us Ohlone people in the present tense. A lot of times people talk about us as if we're only part of the past. Remember that we're in our home today, where we've always been, that we're a living people, and that we'll be in our home tomorrow as well. So if you ever hear anybody talk about us only using past tense markers, let them know that the Ohlones are here today. We're here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. These days, Frida Kahlo's image is all around us. Her iconic eyebrows and piercing gaze have been immortalized on T-shirts, tequila bottles, tote bags. But before her image became so ubiquitous, Kahlo was a budding artist waiting for her big break. And 2 formative stays in San Francisco had a big impact on her life and her work. She first came to San Francisco in the 1930s with her husband, Diego Rivera, who had been commissioned to paint 2 murals in the city. And at the time, she was merely regarded as the wife of a famous Mexican artist. When she returned to the city a decade later, it was a tumultuous time. Her and Diego were divorced. Her health, which had been a struggle for her her entire life, was not doing well. Most of the time that she was in the city on that stint, she stayed at St. Luke's Hospital. Meanwhile, Diego Rivera is busy painting the Pan-American Unity mural at the World's Fair on Treasure Island.
When I first come to San Francisco in 1930s and 40s, I remarried Diego on his birthday, December 8th, 1940. I went back to Mexico at the end of the year alone. It was a very tumultuous time because by the time Diego and I got remarried, he wanted to express our love for each other. The fair had already been closed for 2 months when the mural was finally shown. And he still had other commitments in California. Diego was under much pressure to finish, but that was his fault. As soon as he got to San Francisco, he decided to make the mural much larger than what they had agreed upon, a size he could have finished while the fair was still on. And without people, the arts building was very cold. It was really like a big airplane hangar for the flying boats. He and Emilucha were freezing, Emilu Packard. Diego's health is not so good. The cold air hurt his poor eyes and his pulmones. So Diego is very busy, and so Emilucha would come to St. Luke's and tell me everything. On his way back to Mexico, Diego drove with Emilucha and her Papa Walter to Santa Barbara. He stayed there for a month, and he painted. I wanted him here with me. So when he finally reached the frontera, he flew home. It took 2 weeks for Diego to get over his anger at coming back to Mexico. He had been treated so well in California, and here, he always has to watch his back. I really love the picture that Emilucha took of Diego and me in our kitchen. We look like we are one. Diego took pictures of Emilucha and me with our camera. And she will never betray me with Diego. When he goes back to San Francisco, I will go with him, like I did in 1930s. We stayed near Chinatown at Rockstaffel Studio on Montgomery Street. The bay is so gorgeous. And I was very impressed watching the ocean for the first time. It can be seen from everywhere. The wharf was very close to the house, and on Sundays, there are many people fishing. I really love living near Chinatown. All the children are so beautiful and dressed so colorfully. I like to go to all the tienditas. I do that here too, down by the Zocalo at Dragon de Oro, where Senorita Chiu knows the things that I like and always surprises me and my friends. You know, back in the 1930s, she was deported back to China from Mexico when the gringos kicked out the Mexicans out of the United States. I'm so glad she came back.
In the Pan American Unity mural, why do you think Diego left the canvas blank in front of your image?
I don't know. Our styles are very different. Diego paints what is outside, and I paint what is inside. That is because we are yin and yang, dualidades. Diego doesn't want to paint for me. He encourages me to paint and think for myself. Maybe by leaving the canvas blank, Diego is showing me that he values me as a fellow artist. I paint because I need to. And I paint whatever passes through my head without any consideration. Maybe Diego is more sensitive than me. I just remembered that in the portrait that I did of Dr. Eliezer, I painted in a drawing of Diego and even signed his name. Most of the time, he doesn't explain what he is painting, but he told me that in the Pan American Unity mural, that my image represented our continent. Sometimes the gringos forget that we all live in the same continent, that we're all Americanos. Though my papa was born in Germany, I am from here. I have chosen to paint about here. You know, Diego, when people were trying to buy his work, he was always encouraging them to buy my pieces too. Those estúpidos didn't know how good my paintings were, like Lola Olmedo. She didn't like me or my paintings, but I didn't like her either. She acted as if her caca didn't stink. Lots of rich people are like that, especially las gringas. You know, Diego says, someday people will love my paintings like they love his. He counted me among 5 or 6 most prominent modern painters. He says, I paint better than him.
Frida Kahlo, everyone. Let's bring this up. All right, so that was an excerpt from a play that was written and performed by 2 very talented people, including Jean Franco, the artist and performer here. Thank you so much for being here, Jean.
Thank you, everybody.
So you have been performing as Frida Kahlo for some years now. Tell us a little bit about, what that has, what kind of impact she's had on you.
Frida taught me many things, especially when accidents happen to you. Just keep more forward and go on with it, especially when there's nothing to be done. She has taught me to become resilient and to become, and persevere through all the tumultuous things that life gives you.
And tell us about the impact that you think that Frida has had on artists in the Bay Area today.
Well, especially for the Latinos here in the Bay Area, back in the 1970s, Frida and Diego painted about social and political circumstances in their art. And when these artists look back to the work of Frida and Diego back in the 1930s and 40s, they got inspired to do their work and create a movement from their work.
And tell us about what you are wearing. How do you put this together?
So this is the typical dress from the Tehuantepec culture in Mexico. They are a matriarchal society, and Frida wore this as a symbol of power, as a symbol of empowerment.
All right. Well, Jean Franco, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed your performance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm actually going to invite you to keep playing because I would love to have the Calvin Keys Quartet play us What a Difference a Day Makes. Would you? That music is putting me right at ease. Thank you. There's nothing quite like jazz to make you feel something. Did you know that San Francisco has quite the history with jazz? Here to tell us a lot more about it is KQED's host of Consider This, Bianca Taylor. Woo!
If you were walking down San Francisco's Fillmore Street in the 1950s, chances are you might run into Billie Holiday at a restaurant, or Ella Fitzgerald trying on hats, maybe even Thelonious Monk smoking a cigarette on the corner. None of this would have been out of the ordinary in the neighborhood known as the Harlem of the West.
The music in the Fillmore, I think it did a lot socially. What with the music, it's an international language, I think it had a way of bringing the people together.
That's jazz drummer Earl Watkins in an interview with Carol Chamberlain for her documentary on the Fillmore called The Legend of Bop City. In the Fillmore, you could go out on Friday night and not come home until Sunday night because there was so much to do. Jazz clubs booked musical acts every single night of the week, and musicians from that era talk about roaming from one club to the next, just stopping at each stop and jamming along the way. And it wasn't unusual for a very big name like Miles Davis or Thelonious Monk to just show up at the club unannounced and kick you off stage to start playing themselves. Musician Terry Hilliard started playing at venues in the Fillmore district in the 1950s when he was still a student at San Francisco State.
The reason it was so different is because of the culture. Had a culture that it was a place where talent could be developed, whether it be music, art, dancing, or whatever. It was there. It was a place where you could express yourself and be accepted by others, and you had an audience. We had great crowds, people really dressed up nice. The places were very elegant, and it was just a lot of joy.
The Fillmore was also one of the very few places that Terry could play a venue as a black man and enter through the front door.
Fillmore, they were black clubs.
One of the best-known clubs got its start in 1950 when John Jimbo Edwards, who was San Francisco's first African-American car salesman, took over a defunct jazz club. He had planned to run it as a cafe at first, calling it Jimbo's Waffle Shop, but his musician friends, they had other ideas. They took over the back room of the space and they started hanging out there, playing late-night music performances that didn't start until all the other clubs had closed, usually around 2 o'clock in the morning. That's how Jimbo's Waffle Shop got transformed into Bop City. Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, Dinah Washington, and John Coltrane were just a few of the names that played there. By 1965, though, pop culture had started to move on from jazz. Clubs featuring different genres of music popped up in the city, and jazz albums started to fall off the top of the music charts. Bop City closed its doors in 1965, following a number of other prominent Fillmore clubs that had already shuttered. But the biggest blow to the neighborhood came when the Fillmore became the focus of San Francisco's urban renewal program. The so-called renewal authorized the demolition of the neighborhoods the city considered slums. Residents were forced out of their homes, often with very little warning and not enough compensation. Now we look back at the program and it's heavily criticized for displacing communities of color and undercutting their financial security. The redevelopment of the Fillmore was one of the largest projects of renewal on the West Coast. It impacted nearly 20,000 people. And by the time new housing and businesses were finally completed in the 1980s, most of the former Fillmore residents couldn't afford to move back in. According to the US Census Bureau, in the 1970s, 10% of San Francisco's population identified as Black. In 2020, that number was down by half. Even though the neighborhood has changed, jazz in the Bay Area isn't gone. There are incredible musicians like Calvin Keys, who played in the Fillmore in the 60s, keeping the art and the spirit of the Fillmore alive today. So please give another big hand to the Calvin Keys Quartet.
Yes, dear. Thank you.
You should be on.
Testing 1, 2.
Am I on? Okay, thank you. So Calvin,
Thank you, dear.
do you remember what it was like the first time you played in the Fillmore? Tell us about it.
It was in 1961. Excuse me. I was playing with a trio called Frank Edwards out of Kansas City. And we played Kansas City, Denver, Omaha, San Francisco. And I first came to San Francisco in 61, and we played at the Booker T. Washington Hotel for Dr. Charles Sullivan. And that was the beginning for me here in San Francisco. And there's so much that I could talk about. But one of the experiences that I had was playing with Mr. John Handy. And he's supposed to be here, but under certain circumstances, he wasn't able to make it. Excuse me, but he sends his love. And another experience I had was a friend of mine from Kansas City named Norman Williams. We called him the Bishop. He said, Calvin, come on, I'm going to take you downtown. We're going to hear this group. I said, really? I said, well, what's the name of the group? He said, Miles Davis. I said, who is that? So I go in with Norman, and I'm sitting on the couch next to Cannonball Adley. So Norman and John Coltrane went in the back of the club and started playing some rhythm changes. But little did I know I was in the company of some of the greatest outstanding musicians that will ever live.
And what time of the morning was this? 2 a.m., 3 a.m.?
No, this was a Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. But prior to that, we went to a jam session at this club called...
Was it Jack's?
It was on Jack's of Sutter Street. And we used to start a jam session at 6 a.m. every Sunday. And the ladies of the evening and their partners would be off. And so all the musicians in the Bay Area would come to Jack's every Sunday morning at 6 o'clock. Merle Saunders, Richard Groove Holmes. I mean, that's just a few. But hey, San Francisco, Fillmore Street, I still can't talk about it enough. But it was one great experience I've ever had musically speaking. And I started playing music when I was 13. And that was 65 years ago. So, you know, you can't say enough about Fillmore.
And where do you like to listen and play jazz today?
SF Jazz Center over on...
Other people too? Yeah.
What's the name of it? What's the name of that street over there? Franklin Street. Yes, that's one of the greatest clubs that exist. And I worked at a club last Thursday on Haight Street, the Peacock Lounge. And it was beautiful. And the guy said, Calvin, you worked here before. I said, really? Because I could, it'd been so long I'd forgotten. But when I walked in the club, I said, "Oh, I remember this." And so we're talking on about 25 years ago. So, I mean, there's so many stories and so many experiences that I had here in San Francisco. I ended up moving to Oakland. But San Francisco is still one of the greatest cities on the planet, and the music has made it like that.
And speaking of SF Jazz, you're going to be playing there on July 13th, is that right? Okay, so you guys can all do it again on July 13th.
And I'll be there with Jazz Sawyer, and we're doing a tribute to the late Ed Kelly. He was a music teacher over in Oakland, and he did a lot of things here in San Francisco at Keystone Corner.
And you're going to play one more song for us while I
May
walk
I?
off? Yes, please.
I'll be out.
Everyone, Calvin Keys Quartet.
This is a composition that was written by Mr. Horace Silver, one of the greatest American classical musical writers in the world. It's called Satchmos.
the Calvin Keys Quartet. And now for something completely different. What comes with a check at the end of every Chinese meal? A fortune cookie. Like orange slices after a blood draw, they are a given. What you might not know, though, is that the history of this little fortune cookie runs right through San Francisco. Here to tell us more about that is KQED's Susie Racho.
To understand the origins of the fortune cookie we know today, you need travel no farther than the Japanese tea garden in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. The garden was originally an exhibit in the California Midwinter International Exposition of 1894, a grand fair that took place in Golden Gate Park and drew more than 2.5 million visitors. A landscape architect named Makoto Hagiwara, who immigrated from Japan in 1878, tended the grounds. When the exposition closed, park officials allowed Hagiwara to continue to operate the Japanese-style garden as a permanent part of the park. Under his leadership, the park grew. Now, one thing you should know about Hagiwara, he was a born marketer. He was into branding before branding was cool. Here's gardener and historian Stephen Pitzenbarger.
If you came to the garden while he was managing it, everything had his name on it. Napkins would say M. Hagiwara. There would be pots in the garden with M. Hagiwara, teapots, teacups. You know, his name was everywhere.
But Hagiwara was also mindful about hospitality. He wanted to serve visitors a small treat along with green tea in the garden's tea house. He considered a few Japanese snacks, like senbei, which I have in my pocket. You guys have them too. You've got two flavors. You've got a ginger and you've got a sesame. Feel free to snack along with the story. Traditionally, these would be soy sauce flavored, or at the time that he wanted to serve them, they would have been soy sauce flavored. And senbei date back all the way to 737 AD. They're usually baked or deep fried, and you might offer them to a house guest as a little something to snack on. But Hagiwara thought a soy sauce-flavored cracker might not appeal to American palates. So food historians say that Hagiwara most likely drew inspiration for fortune cookies from fortune crackers. These are sold around shrines in Japan, and these cookies have paper fortunes but not baked inside. As you can see, they're tucked into the center fold. It's outside the cookie. These big brown crackers are flavored with miso and sesame. Ultimately, he worked with Shuichi Okamura, the owner of the local confectionery shop Benkyoto in Japantown, which sadly closed after 100 years during the pandemic, to create something just for American tastes. So guess what they added? But exactly, sugar, white sugar, butter, vanilla. They came up with the fortune cookie flavor that we know today. Their other innovation was putting the fortunes inside the cookie. And Hagiwara's fortune cookie was a hit, of course, and drew many visitors to the garden. And just like everything else he created, the cookies had his name, in this case, his initials, MH, etched into the hard cookie. So if you guys feel inspired by Mr. Hagiwara, please dig in. Now, how this cookie, born from Japanese tradition and created for the Japanese tea garden, came to be found in Chinese restaurants, well, here's what Jennifer Aitley, author of the Fortune Cookie Chronicles, says.
When the Japanese first came to the United States, a lot of them actually ran Chinese restaurants because back in the 1910s, 1920s, Americans were not eating sushi, right? Sushi, raw fish, like no-go. So instead, you had Japanese opening Chinese restaurants because that was familiar with like chop suey and chow mein and egg foo young. And in this mix of Japanese families opening Chinese restaurants, they began serving fortune cookies as a form of dessert.
Then, when people of Japanese descent were imprisoned at American camps during World War II, Chinese restaurants began serving them, and Chinese bakeries took over production of the cookie and never looked back.
I like to say that fortune cookies, the Japanese invented them, the Chinese popularized them, but the Americans ultimately consumed them.
So there's a lot of American history wrapped up in a little fortune cookie. Thanks.
How's everyone doing? Got our blood sugar up, we got brownies, we got fortune cookies, there's more. Just wait. Next, we are headed to an island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay where you will find a collection of abandoned wood buildings sinking into the ground. They're all that remain of a town called Drawbridge, which is often referred to as the last ghost town in the Bay Area. It's prohibited to set foot on the island these days, but Bay Curious producer Jessica Plachek will take us there in this film.
If you find yourself traveling by train through the marshlands at the south end of the bay, you might see some ramshackle, dilapidated buildings scattered on either side of the tracks. Once upon a time, this was the town of Drawbridge. One of our listeners wanted to know more.
I'd like to know more about Drawbridge, anything about the history and why it was created and when it became a ghost town. Thanks a lot.
Today, like John said, Drawbridge is a ghost town, often called the last remaining ghost town in the Bay Area. The story of Drawbridge began in 1876 when a new railroad line was built linking the Bay Area to Santa Cruz. The line took a direct route through the marshes of the South Bay, crossing over a roughly mile-long stretch of land known today as Station Island. As riders passed through, they'd look out and see ducks. Thousands of them. It was a duck hunting paradise. So those riders started getting off the train to go shoot 'em up. Before the 19th century was over, the tiny island began growing into a small town.
Basically, they were hunters, and then people got so they liked it down there without hunting. So they come and go all during the year, not just during the duck season. It was a very, very nice place to be.
By the 1920s, Drawbridge had grown to include gun clubs, hotels, and about 80 or 90 homes with both seasonal and full-time residents. At its peak, the small island housed about 600 people. Because of its remote location and the fact that there was no government or law enforcement, the makeshift town developed a reputation for prostitution and gambling.
The bar did a good business, and apparently there was entertainment of all sorts.
But former residents don't talk about that. Instead, they wax on about idyllic rural living and life in a somewhat strange location on the outskirts of the booming bay.
The big excitement was if they had to open the bridge to let a boat go through. Then everybody came out to see the bridge open, so the big deal. Yeah, times have changed.
Times have changed.
Looked better in the old days.
So what happened? Why is the town abandoned? For starters, pollution and sewage from the increasingly industrial South Bay flowed into the marshes, making it nasty for both humans and wildlife.
The canneries would dump so much garbage, lye water basically, so it was sulfuric acid. in the water that would turn it black, and it would turn the paint on the house black, and all of the utensils in the kitchen would turn black.
On top of that, in the 1930s, salt manufacturing took over the area. Levees were built, and Drawbridge was surrounded by salt ponds. The once pristine marshlands were no more. To make matters worse, more and more people were tapping the underground aquifer throughout the 20th century, and Drawbridge, the town already at sea level, started to sink.
And first thing you know, you hear a lapping underneath the cabin, and then the next thing you know, you've got water coming into the cabin. So you're due to raise the cabin again.
In 1963, there were fewer than 5 residents. By that point, newspapers were writing about Drawbridge as if it was a ghost town already.
They also said there was all kinds of antiques and stuff here, which they were, but people still owned them.
This led to looting, vandalism, and arson. The remaining residents left, except one, Charlie.
Why I stayed out there and put up with this junk, I don't know why I put up with it. I just liked the environment down there. But the only thing is I can't tell you what I liked about it.
Charlie finally left in 1979, and by that time, Drawbridge had become part of a wildlife preserve. Today, it's protected land, illegal to step foot on. So now the only way to see those old shacks is from passing trains, which leaves Drawbridge just for the birds. For Bay Curious, this is Jessica Placzek.
I love seeing all those old photos of the Bay Area from yesteryear. And our next segment is going to go look back a little further than that. Have you ever considered what the Bay Area was like during the Ice Age? Was the whole place covered in ice? Was the coastline the same? Were things in different places? Was there, were different animals here? Well, here to tell us a little bit more about that is reporter Daniel Potter and the scientist in charge of vertebrate collections at the University of California Museum of Paleontology in Berkeley, Dr. Pat Holroyd.
If your mental picture of the Ice Age involves a frozen wasteland, you're thinking of someplace besides the Bay Area. The Bay Area during the peak of the Ice Age was not covered with snow and ice. In fact, not much of California was. The main ice sheets covered Canada and the northern parts of the states in the Midwest. Here in California, the ice sheet covered the Sierra Nevada. By contrast, the Bay Area would have been lush, verdant, and grassy. Also, in place of the bay, picture a valley with a river flowing through. And the Pacific coastline, it would have been about 20 miles or so west of where it is now, out near the Farallon Islands. You could have walked there. With that, Dr. Holroyd, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Could you kick things off by sort of telling us what animals would have been roaming around the Bay Area during the Ice Age, during the Pleistocene?
So if you were out on a hike to the Farallons, which you could have done, the landscape would have looked much like this. And the animals you would have seen in the distance, hopefully not too close, would have been mammoths and mastodons. You might have seen a giant ground sloth. You may have seen camels. You would have seen prehistoric horses. You would have also probably run into all of the animals that you're familiar with today. So there'd still be ground squirrels. There'd still be pocket gophers digging up people's yards. So that's the kind of environment we had at the time.
So all of these fossils and bones, have these all been found locally?
All of these taxa, all of these animals have been found locally. This is a cast from La Brea, but nonetheless, we also had these Smilodon, the saber-toothed tiger, here in the Bay Area. In fact, this is one of the areas where we've had them for hundreds of thousands of years. We find them even all over the Bay Area, from Fremont to up into the North Bay. So this would have been a very common big cat at the time.
So you're just like on a hike and you just kick one, or?
Hopefully not. No.
Pat, you mentioned mammoths and mastodons. I think a lot of folks, when they hear those words, they think it's a synonym for a big hairy elephant, but not quite. In fact, they're not the same thing. How are they different?
So most of the time we think of an elephant as being something that eats a lot of grass. So most proboscideans are like that. And that's actually what the mammoths were like. So they had teeth that were that are filled with these ridges. So this is just one tooth from the mouth of, and all of these surfaces are for grinding down grass. So that's what they do with their teeth. Whereas the mastodons have these ridges, and that are very complicated ridges, and sort of loafs across their teeth. And what they were doing is eating more woody things. They were also eating a lot of shrubs. So for example, they probably would have very much enjoyed the very rich oaks of the area. They would have been also eating entire blackberry plants and other things that were growing here, because they even find thorns in what we have fossilized dung from these animals.
So because the mammoths and mastodons weren't eating the same things, they could coexist. They could live side by side. They weren't competitors.
Exactly. That's one of the things that's so remarkable. Even though they both probably ate some grass, they were eating very different kinds of grasses. So with the mammoths being in more the open grasslands versus the mastodons being in swampier areas and eating sedge grasses and things that we see growing today in wetlands. And so the Bay Area itself was a vast wetland at that time, which was a really wonderful environment for these animals.
Very cool. And we would be remiss not to note, this question first got on our radar for the podcast some years ago, thanks to a kid named Bronwyn. Did Bronwyn make it here tonight? Bronwyn, could you stand up if you're here?
Hey!
Thanks for being here, Bronwyn. Bronwyn really loves cats. Pat, can you tell us about some of the cats that were in the Bay Area during the ice?
Absolutely. So, of course, we would have had mountain lions, just as we do today, but there are actually far more cats in the past than we have dogs, and that we certainly have in the area today. So we would have had bobcats, we would have had pumas or mountain lions, but we also had these large saber-toothed cats. We would have also had the American lion, which is a yet bigger cat. And then also we would have had the American cheetah, which was another taxon that became extinct at the same time as a lot of these megafauna did. And this is just an incredibly rich environment that was able to support so many different kinds of big predators. And I know some people like dogs.
I was about to say, what about the dog people among us, Pat?
There are
cats, they're fine.
There are really only two kinds of dogs, though. Even when there's all of these different kinds of things that they could have eaten, from horses to camels to llamas, but we just have the coyotes, just as we do today, and then we would have had the dire wolves. And this is a dire wolf from La Brea. So most of the ones from the Bay Area here are more fragmentary. So I brought an example that looks like a dog. And you can get an idea of just how big this is. Because, if you have a small dog, its skull might be about this long. Whereas this is a really massive animal. And they were capable of crunching bones. And so they were able to eat things that other dogs could not.
So we covered the mammoth and mastodon teeth. We covered the direwolf skull. We covered the smilodon skull. Pat, what's this?
So one of the things that's unusual about the Bay Area is that we don't, as paleontologists, go out on an expedition to San Jose. Sometimes we do, though. And it's because most of the fossils here are found either by local people who are literally out taking their dog for a walk. Lupe the mammoth, which is on display down in San Jose, and inspired the beautiful reconstruction we looked at earlier by Karen Carr. That was found by someone out walking his dog. But most of the time what we're doing is that we're finding or being brought new fossils that are found during construction. And one of the specimens I brought along today is this upper arm bone of a giant ground sloth that came out of the Twin Peaks tunnel. So literally every time you take Muni through the Twin Peaks tunnel, you are traveling through the Pleistocene. You're in the Ice Ages. And just to give you some idea of how big this is, I'm just holding it up next to me. I mean, that's just its upper arm bone, and it's the length of my arm. And this is one of the most common animals we would have had here in the Bay Area, along with the mammoths and mastodons. We find sloths all the time. We have them from down in San Jose. We found them in the Berkeley BART station when it was being excavated. You know, literally the Ice Age is under your feet. And I often tell construction people that if you dig a big enough hole, yes, you will probably find a fossil.
Now, everyone, if you want to get up close with these fossils and casts, we will have them in the lobby after the show. Dr. Holroyd is going to hang out, so you can come check him out, ask some questions. Pat and Dan, thank you so much for coming. We have reached live performances, everyone. We have reached the 7th inning stretch of tonight, so can I get everyone to stand up? Let's get your blood moving. I like to kind of roll my shoulders, maybe a little side to side with the neck, maybe arms down, kind of wiggle the arms out. Maybe pat your neighbor on the head. Okay, now put your arms up. Okay, now clap. 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 I need everyone to get super hyped for this next performer. It's a change of pace here, everyone. Please welcome to the stage, Vera.
Go to sleep when I got you next to me. When I got you next to me all night.
Now, we didn't just bring Vera here because they're amazing, though they are. You are. We brought Vera because they are a performer with Rebel Kings in Oakland. Rebel Kings of Oakland. At the White Horse Inn, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. Now, the White Horse Inn is probably the oldest gay and lesbian bar in the United States. It officially opened in 1936 after the 21st Amendment was passed, but likely operated before that as a speakeasy. The bar has been a vital gathering place for the queer community, but it hasn't always been an entirely safe space. When homosexuality was illegal, patrons had to be discreet. The owners were worried they could lose their liquor license, so if lewd acts were happening on site, they would have to kind of clamp down on it. Patrons recall one owner who would hit them with a broom if he thought they were being too close together, essentially acting as some kind of weird chaperone. Boo. Bay Curious producer Katrina Schwartz co-wrote the story on this topic for the book. Please welcome her to the stage.
All right, so I know that you have been performing at the White Horse for years. But tell me a little bit about how you first got introduced to it and what the bar means to you.
I would love to. Thank you for that question. I moved to California in 2005, and because I'm queer and fabulous, I of course started going to the White Horse Bar to watch the Rebel Kings of Oakland. In 2005, I was young, full of dreams, just a young queer lad about town, and they noticed that I would be very apt to pick up tips. You see the energy? Don't I look like I could pick up tips? Yes, and I still pick up the tips, but I began as a tip monitor. Then I became a backup dancer. Did you like my dance moves? So I was a dancer, and then I became a duet partner, and then I became a troupe member, and now I am the co-host of the soon-to-be 13 years old Rebel Kings of Oakland. Oh, my band, everybody, my band.
But it sounds like you weren't always part of the Drag Kings, so what
Yes.
made you feel like you could join?
Exactly. You know, it's just the White Horse and the Rebel Kings of Oakland were a really delicious, safe space, super inclusive, super welcoming. I discovered everything there. I discovered my desire to be a drag king. I discovered my non-binary transgender. Everybody! Like my they necklace? Yes. It's just such a safe space to explore and really find out who you are. And a lot of performers have found themselves and gone on different gender journeys through the troupe and felt, both as an audience or a performer, felt safe to explore that. And that's really what the White Horse means to me.
And
Well,
how
that's
does,
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Well, how does the history of the White Horse impact your experience of it?
Yeah, every time I go in there, there's a sign and it says 1933, 1933, 1936. We might have there's a little date debacle going on. But, you know, whenever I go in there, I just think about all the queer and trans ancestors who have stomped in that very bar and felt safe in that bar, even when it was where you had to wear a certain number of gender correct clothing, and you know people would swap. If there was a raid, they would swap. Like, oh, you take my man pants, I'll lady shirts. I just think about all of that, and that they were safe in there, and just the way the building is built, it's so obvious that it has been ready for that, and it's there's so many attacks on drag and trans people right now, and being in that space and thinking about all they fought for and all we're fighting for now, it's just really, really powerful, and I really feel everyone with me when I'm in that bar. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the Drag Kings, your troupe.
Oh, my brothers, everybody. It's really, really beautiful. The Rebel Kings of Oakland, again, about to turn 13. I just thinking about how much I love all of them, I get choked up. I now also have 23 drag children, very fertile, very virile. Yes. Thank you. So, just thinking about how the troupe is amazing and supportive, and so many people have come and seen us perform and then become our children and want to perform as well. And the show has just been going, and we're one of the only shows that's open to any performer. It's a Google form. You don't have, everybody's always like, how do I audition? I'm like, there's no audition. It's just a Google form. And I really like that. And we all work really hard to keep the show accessible and a safe space. And it's always been no one turned away for lack of funds. And we all kind of just work really hard to keep everyone who wants to perform to have that safe stage to express themselves.
Wow. And to close us out, how about promote yourself?
Allow me. Oh, wow. Everybody have a cellular phone device? Wonderful. Everyone take it out. Go. Get me more Instagram followers right now. So my Instagram, ooh, yes, a little blue. My Instagram is at Veritas_22. That's VERITAS_22. Why is it that? I have my master's in Latin. Hello, fossil. And then also follow at Rebel Kings Oakland. And if you see a lot of Canva flyers, yes, they're all me.
Everybody, Vera! Thank you. Our next stop. We needed like 20 more minutes to practice. I'm gonna go slower next time. Okay, our next stop on tonight's journey is traveling through time and space into a dark and damp place. And like our first video, it's a place that you can't get to, legally, anyway. In this film, reporter Carly Severin takes us into San Francisco's underworld.
They are under every house, run along every block, and cover a city of nearly 1 million people. They're a world of hidden tunnels that few get to see right beneath your feet. And we get to take you down there. Our guide is someone who knows every inch of this labyrinth.
My name's Megan Abedy. I'm an assistant engineer for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission Wastewater Enterprise. I'm part of the division of Wastewater Enterprise, which is called the Collection System Division. It's basically a euphemism for sewers. I crawl through a lot of sewer pipes. That's basically my job. It's fun.
Exploring the sewers is no picnic, so Megan's coming up above ground to help us suit up in protective gear.
Oh my God. Oh, hey.
Hey, how's it going?
We put on a harness, a helmet, and waders for the knee-high water.
And this is the gas meter that will go off if any bad gases are present. Okay.
Wastewater I found it really interesting and satisfying. Not only are you providing a really vital service to people, but you're kind of like part of the circle of life. All right, yo-yo's clear. So we're gonna start walking, right? Yes. Okay, we're gonna start walking. San Francisco's sewer network began to be built during the gold rush era. So we have pipes that are still in use that are 150 years old. San Francisco has what's called a combined system. That means that the stormwater and the sewage water, like from your toilet and your sinks, it all goes into the same set of pipes.
200 feet below ground, we find a tunnel bored through existing granite rock, giving this part of the sewer its unique cave-like structure. Here, we start to hear another sound.
Can you hear that? That's the ocean.
Even with a guide, exploring the sewers can be risky.
I totally get the draw of going and exploring sewers on your own, but it's really a bad idea. When we were in here earlier at high tide, it was very loud and it was actually shaking the ground a little bit, but the reason we're here now on 4th of July is because it's the lowest tide of the year. So the upside of that is we get to walk all the way out to the discharge pipe, hopefully. The downside is you don't get the bell rumbling ocean bore like we did earlier, so.
But we get to live.
But we get to live.
However, the water isn't the only thing that holds danger down here.
There's gases in sewers that can kill you pretty quickly if you don't know about them. Hydrogen sulfide is the main one we're usually concerned about. There are concentrations of hydrogen sulfide that can just knock you out in minutes.
The end of our journey is what they call a discharge pipe, which empties water into the ocean. It's only used during heavy storms, when the storage spaces in the sewers get full to the brim with water.
Another big challenge we're facing is sea level rise. A lot of our discharge points, they're not getting any lower, but the water level's getting higher, so we sometimes face the issue of seawater backflowing into our system. The oldest portion of the pipe, salt water going into the treatment plant is bad. There's biological systems that treat the wastewater, and seawater or bay water coming in at high tide is not great for the microbes that break down our sewage.
As much as I like being in a sewer, it's kind of fun when you get to the end of a pipe and you sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's really nice.
This is the circle of life. We're, disposing of people's waste. We're making it okay to send back into the environment. And I love it.
Carly Severn is here to tell us a little bit more about that shitty assignment.
You said it, not me.
What editor gave you that assignment?
It was so fun. I think people don't believe me when I say how fun it was, but it was just so fun. And it was so much work to organize, because I think on a lot of Bay Curious assignments, you can kind of just rock up and do your own thing and just arrive. And that was not the case, because as the video says, it's really dangerous to go into the sewers without protection, without knowing what you're doing. So we had to wait for the city officials to give us the green light and say that we're monitoring rainfall, we're monitoring the tides, we'll give you a time. And so we waited and waited, and then finally they said, we have a time, and it is 1 a.m. on July 4th.
Good thing you're not American.
That's funny you said. Well, our amazing videographer, Shruti Mamadana, who did that video, so we kind of come up at the end of the night, and the sun has come up, and we're like exhausted, and we're covered in trash bags. More on the trash bags later. And I was like, oh, Shruti, I'm so tired. I'm just going to go to bed. You're going to go to bed too, right? And she was like, no, I have a family barbecue for the 4th of July. And so she went to that and had a great time by all accounts.
Did she shower?
I really hope so. Because it's exactly what it looks like. You're going through, shitty water, basically.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the experience of being down there.
It is dark. It is cold. It is claustrophobic. It is not for you if you don't like climbing up and down ladders. We had to wear harnesses. We had to wear protective gear. And you are literally, you're up to your thighs in this water.
What's in the water?
It's poo. And Megan Aberdeen, who's in that video, who's so great, she always makes these little jokes about seeing little kind of floaters go past you. It's like, later for the jokes, Megan, I'm not finding them funny right now. But it was so fun, and I do think that people don't believe me when I say that it was the best assignment I ever had, because how often do you get to do that, and to go out and to see the ocean and that big tanker going past? It was really cool.
And so, no, you're not going to disclose where that was for
I'm not allowed
the audience here?
I'm not allowed. Well, there are folks who do go down and explore these sewer networks. They're called urban explorers. That is their thing. I could never encourage anyone to do that.
You could die. You could die.
You could die, as Megan says in the video. But I will tell you that it is a spot in San Francisco. We had to hike a little bit into it. And we were never too far from the ocean. So if you can triangulate the
Everyone hears me looking at maps tonight, trying to figure it out.
And there is this entry sight. Like I've driven past it and I know it's there, but hopefully you will never know it's there. I think if you didn't know the exact coordinates, you would just never have any clue that this thing was there. But it's under your feet. It's really cool.
Carly Severin, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I'm learning how to work with Jess. One of the first jobs that I ever had was working at this ice cream parlor in Burlington, North Carolina called Smitty's Ice Cream. And I worked there for 6 years. I started as an ice cream scooper and worked my way all the way up to ice cream manager, which is basically just one step above. But I loved this job, maybe not as much as the one I have now, but I really loved this job, and I do miss a couple perks about it, specifically copious amounts of coconut almond chip. That was my flavor. Everyone's got their flavor. And in the era we are now, where we have all these flavors like, salted caramel and matcha tea, it's hard to imagine, but it wasn't that long ago that the American palate was limited to chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. The invention of Rocky Road in the 1920s changed the ice cream game with mix-ins. Nuts, marshmallow, get it all in there, yes. Here to tell us more about this genre-creating ice cream is host of the California Report magazine, Sasha Coca.
So nearly a century has passed since Rocky Road was invented. We know that it happened in Oakland, but there's still a dispute over just who thought up the recipe. Was it Fenton's Creamery or was it Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream? Who rightfully holds the claim to Rocky Road? Well, maybe you can help decide. So there's a shopping district that runs along College Avenue in North Oakland, and there you can still see the home of the original headquarters of Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream. The business was founded in 1928 by a German immigrant named William Dreyer. And just a year after it opened, something major happened. The American stock market crashed. The Depression. So the story goes...
And so William Dreyer is like, I want to make a new ice cream flavor that puts a smile on people's faces during this rocky road of life. Rocky Road becomes America's first blockbuster ice cream flavor after chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. So really, we can kind of say thanks to Mr. Dreyer, to William Dreyer, for starting the whole idea of new ice cream flavors.
That is Local Food Adventures guide Lauren Herpick. She says William Dreyer was adapting a popular candy from the time that was made with marshmallows and walnuts, and that originally Dreyer used walnuts in his Rocky Road ice cream, but he thought they didn't have that bite, that crispness, and that they could get kind of soggy because they're porous. So he decided to switch to almonds because he thought they worked better. Dreyer's ultimately took its Rocky Road flavor well beyond Oakland. The company was bought by Nestle in 2002, and today its ice cream is stocked in just about every supermarket freezer across the country. And that really grinds the gears of another ice cream maker in Oakland. Not far from where Dreyer's got its start, Mom and Pop Fenton's Creamery sits on Piedmont Avenue, and they also claim to have invented Rocky Road. Small batch and handmade, that's the way Fenton's had served up its ice cream since the 1920s. And legend has it that's when Melvin Fenton, grandson of the original owner, he used to sometimes fly the milk in to the Fenton's Creamery. That's when he came up with the idea for Rocky Road. And the current owner, Scott Whidden, says Melvin Fenton, he was a pretty inventive guy.
He's a visionary, forward-thinking guy, and he goes, whoa, mix-ins. So the thought process on it was, we're into the depressions, it's bad times, smooth ice cream, and then there's these bumps. It gets rocky.
Sound familiar? Rocky Road, the bumpy road of life during the Depression, chocolate, marshmallows, nuts, maybe that can make it better. But in the case of Fenton's, they used walnuts just like the candy bar. So Fenton's claims Dreyer's stole the credit, even though they knew that Melvin Fenton invented Rocky Road. So one person who's been watching this whole debate is ice cream connoisseur Amy Edinger. She wrote a book called Sweet Spot, an ice cream binge across America.
What's very, very interesting is Fenton's is a very beloved Bay Area institution, but it is not well known outside of the Bay Area. So regardless of who actually invented it, Dreyer's is hands down the marketer of Rocky Road. And just because the other company is the one that got the word out about it doesn't mean that Fenton's didn't invent it. There's no way for us to know.
And really, at the end of the day, I don't know that it actually matters. What we do know for sure is that Rocky Road was invented in Oakland, and that today both Fenton's and Dreyer's serve up a mighty fine scoop of what's become one of America's most popular ice cream flavors. Thanks.
And surprise, surprise, on your way out tonight, you will get to decide if you are a Fenton's person or a Dreyer's person, because there is one more treat waiting for you when you leave the Commons. We have made it to our final segment of the evening, but I have a quick poll I need to do with you. We are currently, obviously, in the city of San Francisco, and people have pretty strong feelings about what this place should be called. Here. I want to do a poll. I want to do a poll about how you feel about certain names. So yay, upbeat, yay, if you like it. Nay, if it's not your thing, or boo, whatever. Negative. Okay. What about the city? How do we feel about San Fran? SF. Okay, and Frisco. Okay, it's a little mixed. Frisco is always fun to drop in conversation and just see what kind of response you're going to get. Chances are good the nickname will be met with a healthy dose of side-eye and maybe a grimace. Here to tell us about why is KQED News Director Vinnie Tong.
Well, I can see this is going to be divisive. But we're going to start with a bit of history. The origin of the word Frisco is pretty murky. I feel like we can pause here and say it together on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Frisco, thank you. Nobody knows exactly where or when the word was first used, but there's a theory that Frisco got its start in the late 1800s, potentially from someone who was a bit too tipsy, who made a contraction out of San Francisco. That's according to Charles Fracchia, founder of the San Francisco Historical Society.
How about a fellow who's been drinking too much and says, good to be back from San Francisco. You know, it's kind of a contraction.
The earliest written use of the word that Fracchia could find was on a piece of sheet music from 1897 for the song A Frisco Girl. Regardless of when it first appeared, Frisco's use was probably in its heyday when the ports were strong here around the time of World War II in the 1940s. But not long after people started using Frisco, other people started hating it. And the man who led the charge against it then was Herb Caen, the revered San Francisco Chronicle columnist. Caen wanted San Francisco to be classier, more chic, a city that looked more like the East Coast and European cities it wanted to imitate. Here's KQED's Dan Brecky reading from Cain's book.
Don't call it Frisco, it's San Francisco, because it was named after St. Francis of Assisi, and because Frisco is a nickname that reminds the city uncomfortably of the early, brawling, boisterous days of the Barbary Coast and the cribs and sailors who were shanghaied, and because Frisco shows disrespect for a city that is now big and proper and respectable, and because only tourists call it Frisco anyway, and you don't want to be taken for a tourist, do you?
Herb Caen ruined the nickname for a lot of people who wanted to seem proper and cultured. But then there was another contingent, the group that embraced Frisco.
My parents always called it that. They were blue-collar workers. It was just something that was instilled in me as a kid. When I was a little kid, I think I was 12 or 13, there was a bike shop called Frisco Choppers, and raced down there on the bus, down Valencia Street, just to buy a t-shirt that said Frisco in big bold letters, because that was like the coolest.
That's Joey Wilson, co-owner of a tattoo shop in the Mission called Frisco Tattoo. He's also in the Hells Angels, the Frisco chapter, of course. While I was working on this story, I met a Lyft driver named Lorenzo Beasley. And Lorenzo thinks that whether or not you use Frisco is really about where you come from.
I grew up on the bottom of the city in a small neighborhood called Visitation Valley. More of the, I guess you would call it the urban community, like blacks or Hispanics in the city, and those type of people always grew up using that word.
Lorenzo says you hear it in Visitation Valley,
Hans Point,
Lakeview,
Fillmore,
Potrero Hill,
the Mission, especially the Mission. So it's strong there. It's really strong there.
I asked him who doesn't like Frisco.
It's like a higher class of people, I guess, like people who stay like in Nob Hills and stuff. They look at it as like slang. It's definitely a bit of snob, the whole snob thing involved in it.
Linguists say when you're talking about language and word choice, you're virtually always talking about money and power. Your language is a signal that you fit in or that you don't, that you belong or you're an outsider or on the fringes. Knowing which nicknames or slang to use or not is a signal. And today, Frisco regularly shows up in music and art made by people with deep Bay Area roots. Even Herb Caen flip-flopped on Frisco a few times. In 1995, he said, "The toughest guys on the old SF waterfront, neither rubes nor tourists, called it Frisco." So, for us at Bay Curious, it's all right if you want to use Frisco. It's a word with a key place in the city's history, and using it celebrates our diversity. Thank you.
Vinny Tong! All right, let's bring all the contributors and performers back up to the stage. I know a lot of you are in the audience. Come back, come back. While they're on their way up here, please make some noise for the Calvin Keys Quartet. Thanks also to Lance Gardner, Sarah Rose Leonard, and the rest of the live events staff for making tonight possible. Thank you to the guys in the booth, Stan, Mike, Philip, Jonathan, and Danny. Thank all of you. Our performers tonight, Vincent Medina, Louis Trevino, Gene Franco, Will Minez, Dr. Pat Holroyd, and Vera. All the contributors, Christopher Beale, Dan Brecky, John Brooks, Sarah Craig, Sandhya Dirks, Adiza Egan, Asala Sonapur, Maggie Galloway, Sasha Coca, Ryan Levy, Marisol Medina Cadena, Rachel Myro, Liam O'Donoghue, Kelly Amara, Jessica Blachek, Daniel Potter, Susie Racho, Joe Fitzgerald Rodriguez, Katrina Schwartz, Julia Scott, Carly Severn, Kevin Stark, Bianca Taylor, Vinnie Tong, and Chloe Veltman. Plus, all these people on screen. And finally, thank you for coming out. Please stick around for Dire Wolf Skulls. Rocky Road Ice Cream will be signing books in the lobby. I'm Olivia Allen-Price. Thank you and good night.